And good afternoon. I was reminded by Councilmember Mousse 2 years ago that the gavel is to be used. So now I want to remind everyone that this is the Metropolitan Council meeting, Wednesday, April 27th. And before I call this meeting to order, I'd like to acknowledge that this is, that I have now a long speech I will not be giving about how to be virtual, because we're in person. So I'm so thrilled to see everybody here in the council chambers. Congratulations for getting through the last 2 years, almost to this day. And to see everybody in person is really a great privilege. So, and I know some of those of you who have had committee meetings, we're kind of relearning how that works. We can actually have real conversations. And we're, not that we weren't before, but it'll be a little bit more fluid. So, great to see everybody. First order of business is the approval of the agenda. And it has kind of been laid out for you. May I have a motion and a second to approve the agenda?
Move approval.
Seconded.
Thank you. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Liz is so happy. I asked her today, I said, are you sure you don't want to just keep doing roll calls? She said, no, that would be just fine. So. All right, the next item of business is the approval of the minutes from April 13th, 2022. May I have a motion and a second for the approval of the minutes?
Move approval.
Second.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilmember. Any discussion, corrections? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The minutes are approved. Now, at this point, we have an opportunity for the public to address the council on matters that are not on the agenda. If there are any members of the public who wish to address the council, you may do so at this point. All right, not seeing anybody. We will march forward to the next order of business, which is the consent agenda. May I have a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda?
Vento moves approval.
Second.
Thank you, thank you. Any discussion? All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you, the motion has carried. We're on to the reports of standing committees. Community Development has reports on the consent agenda, and the Environment Committee has reports on the consent agenda, and the Management Committee has an item. Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is item 2022-106. It's a same week item. It's the 2022 through 2026 Federal Transit Administration Equal Employment Opportunity Program Plan Update. For the report on this agenda item, which we just took up and passed in management today, the council meets the threshold requirements for implementation of a full equal employment opportunity or EEO plan program plan. We employ 100 or more transit-related employees, requested or received capital or operating assistance in excess of $1 million in the previous federal fiscal year, or requested and received planning assistance in excess of $250,000 in the previous federal fiscal year. FTA requires each applicant, recipient, subrecipient, or contractor that meets the Equal Employment Opportunity Program threshold requirements to submit an updated EEO program every 4 years. The council's current program plan ends on April 30th, 2022, and the new update will begin on May 1st of 2022. The council's statement of policy is signed by the regional administrator, Mary Bogie. FTA EEO plan requires council approval, which is why it's on our agenda tonight. Following council approval and submission of the FTA EEO plan, the next step is for the FTA to review and approve the plan and make it effective, and the council will then publish the plan. Our work within the council is continuous, and the offices of Equity and Equal Opportunity in partnership with Human Resources are implementing 11 primary strategies. Throughout the year, the council will continue to hear progress updates and give feedback on the areas of employee retention, recruitment, outreach, hiring, and promotion. So therefore, Mr. Chair, I move that the Metropolitan Council approve business item 2022-106 for 2022 through 2026 FTA Equal Employment Opportunity Program Plan.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second by Chambliss.
Thank you. Any discussion? Questions? All right. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion is adopted. Next is the report from the Transportation Committee. Councilmember Barb.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We have 3 items to bring before the council tonight. So first of them is, Mr. Chair, council members, is business item number 2022-77, involves approval of an amendment to the Metro D-Line Station Plan. On July 25th, 2018, the Metropolitan Council approved the final D-Line Station Plan, establishing the number and location of stations on the D-Line project. Through additional agency coordination with other street construction projects and associated public engagement efforts, staff have identified 2 changes to the D-Line station plan, both of which would be implemented as future modifications to the line after D-Line operations begin later in 2022. A new D-Line station is recommended at Osseo Road and 47th Avenue in coordination with the Osseo Road Reconstruction Project led by Hennepin County. The southbound D-Line platform at Portland Avenue and 77th Street is recommended to be shifted to the southwest corner of the intersection in coordination with changes to Portland Avenue as part of the I-494 project led by MnDOT. Approval of the plan amendment will allow design and engineering to advance at these station locations. Funding is available within the existing project to accommodate these changes. Therefore, Mr. Chair, I move that the council approve Amendment 1 to the D-Line station plan to add a new station at Osseo Road and 47th Avenue and update the location for a permanent southbound platform at Portland Avenue and 77th Street.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? All right, all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? All right, that motion carried. Councilmember Barber.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, council members, business item number 2022-78 involves approval of an amendment to the Metro B-Line Corridor Plan. On October 13, 2021, the Metropolitan Council approved the final B-Line Corridor Plan, establishing the number and location of stations on the B-Line project. The approved corridor plan noted the potential for platform locations at 3 stations to change in the future as Metro Transit, Hennepin County, and the City of Minneapolis continue to work together to study broader changes to Lake Street. These changes are aimed at reducing crashes on a high injury street, addressing pedestrian safety needs, and improving transit speed and reliability in the corridor. The recommended improvements will restripe most of Lake Street within Minneapolis, resulting in bus lanes on about 50% of Lake Street, along with left turn lanes for safer traffic operations along the corridor. To accommodate these recommended improvements, the B-Line platform locations at Lake and Lyndale, Lake and Bloomington, and Lake and Cedar are recommended to be shifted to the southeast and northwest corners of each intersection. The concept for Lake Street improvements was developed based on feedback from past public engagement efforts, along with targeted engagement efforts led by Hennepin County with support from Metro Transit staff. Approval of the plan amendment will allow design and engineering to advance at these station locations. Therefore, Mr. Chair, I move that the council approve Amendment 1 to the B-Line corridor plan to update platform locations at 3 planned B-Line stations, Lake and Lyndale, Lake and Bloomington, and Lake and Cedar.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any questions? Discussion? All right, all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Councilmember Beck.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, council members, business item number 2022-95 is a same week item to request that the council authorize the negotiation and execution of a contract for asset condition assessment service. The objective of this contract is to complete the preparatory work required for developing the council's asset management plan as required by FTA regulations. The work under this contract is to assess council's support, passenger, and parking facilities. Therefore, Mr. Chair, I move that the council authorize the negotiation and execution of contract 22P111 with Gordian Group for asset condition assessment services in an amount not to exceed $594,686.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? All right, hearing none. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, that motion's carried. Now on to other business. This is business item 2022-107, Juneteenth holiday adoption. So as a note of explanation, last year, Governor Tim Walz recognized June 19th as Juneteenth Freedom Day in the state of Minnesota. And prior to that, President Biden signed into law June 19th as National Independence Day and actually created a national holiday, a federal holiday commemorating the end of slavery in the United States. So everybody, I think, here knows that Juneteenth is an important date. It's important for council employees. And it's more than just commemorating the end of slavery. It's really honoring that history, African Americans, freedom, and really a resolution for us to consider our continuing learning and growth in approaching the tragedies of our past. So this action supports equity, that is one of our highest goals at the council, and demonstrating our council commitment to recognize the important historical milestone, both the culture and the achievements of African Americans across the region. So I think it's important that we consider this seriously and make that commitment. So I will entertain a motion for the Metropolitan Council to adopt the attached resolution number 2022-08, declaring Juneteenth as an official council holiday and directing the regional administrator or the deputy regional administrator, if she's not out of town, to implement all the necessary actions to meet this declaration. Is there a motion and a second?
I'll move.
Thank you, Councilwoman. There's a second?
I'll second.
Great. Any discussion, questions?
Mr. Chair,
Councilmember Johnson.
I just want to thank staff also for bringing this forward to the Management Committee as an information item. We were really very pleased that this was coming forward, and everybody in our discussion was very, very enthusiastically in support of this. So I just want to report that out to the group as well.
Thank you. Councilmember Wolf.
I just had a couple of questions. Normally, when federal holidays change and schedules change for employees, that's part of the process with the unions and negotiations and whatnot on what holidays. So we're skipping that process and just adding a holiday? Is that what this is?
I think the resolution is, as I understand it, is to advance the priority to have it implemented, and one of the steps would be to meet with our various unions. The non-union personnel would be effective, but I'd defer maybe, I don't know if George, you have more insight, and if you don't, that's fine. Maybe
I think Ann.
maybe Ann did.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, council member, that is my understanding, is that Marcy Cordes is going to be beginning to meet with the unions on this matter. But this puts forth that they could be entitled to it, and those are the steps that we need to take next.
Okay.
And I think federal holidays, for instance, in operations where people show up for work on a holiday, which we do, buses operate on the holidays, wastewater is treated on holidays. And so there's a mechanism in those contracts that compensates and recognizes a way to have that benefit. And I would imagine that would be consistent with that practice.
Okay. And then my other question was, then are we going to not have, like, if that falls on a Monday, then community development, would that not happen on that day and be on Tuesday instead?
I think it would be consistent with other holidays. If it is like it is this year, the 19th is on a Sunday.
Sunday, right.
It is recognized on Monday, and you're right, that's a holiday.
Okay. Those were my questions. Thank you.
Any other questions? Thoughts? Okay, all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? All right, motion has carried. We are on to our final item, which is an information from our Community Development Director, Lisa Barras, our report on Thrive MSB 2040 Equity Commitments. Lisa, welcome. I'm glad we waited until you could be here in person and we could see this presentation and engage in questions and thought on this important area. So,
thank you, Mr. Chair and committee members. Please forgive me. This is my first time back in front sitting at this spot. So if I say next slide, I'm sorry, Greg. I will press the button and I will try to do that. I'm also reminded that I needed to print my notes since I won't be looking at a screen looking at them. So if I've missed something, it's all new to me, but not just new in practice. So I really appreciate the opportunity to be in front of you today. For the record, I'm Lisa Barajas, Community Development Director, and the report I'm providing today is not something that I developed on my own. Really have to recognize all of the staff, not just for the work that they have been doing, that if you had the opportunity to look at the report that was posted online, you can see is an enormous volume of work, and that's only related to the commitments that are stated in this document in Thrive, not all of the work that our bodies, our different committees have been engaging in our policy work and things like Juneteenth and some of our procurement policies and practices as well. There is a lot of work that has happened. But today, as we're thinking about and have been discussing with you our 2050 planning process and visioning, we wanted to be sure that we were setting the stage on what have we done related to our commitments that are articulated in Thrive, in particular related to the outcomes. So there is a lot in there, and today I'm going to just talk about equity, and we will get into further detail on other work that we've done since the adoption of Thrive in 2014. So really just tracking progress against our plan, essentially. So in Thrive, if you haven't had the opportunity to read it, Thrive really articulates that promoting equity means addressing these 4 integrated strategies, that we are using our influence and investments, that we're creating real choices in where we live, how we travel, and where we recreate. We're investing in a mix of housing affordability along the region's transit corridors and engaging a full cross-section of the community in decision-making. The strategies and commitments that are included in Thrive are really focused around the council's development policy and planning authorities. So again, I'm going to kind of hammer that home, that this is really about those authorities and not about our administrative practices or our hiring practices or other related types of institutional work that we might be doing. There are 31 specific commitments related to equity in Thrive. I am not going to go through each of those in detail today. The report that is posted online does that. And I will also say that even what we've put into the report is not a detailed report on each of the projects that we've done to fulfill those commitments, because a lot of work has gone into that. We've tried to provide links wherever possible where deeper and broader reports have been provided to the council, whether that's at a council meeting or actual published reports online, because we could not seriously do justice to this or make it a meaningful or readable document if we compiled the vast amount of work that had gone into accomplishing the commitments that are here in this document. So I'm just going to provide highlights today. And after I've reviewed these highlights, then we'll turn to some discussion on what we've learned to help shape our work for the 2050 Development Guide. And I really want to hear from you also on what worked and maybe what we could improve upon on the 2050 planning process. This isn't just a conversation that is limited to today. We will continue to have that conversation. This won't be your last chance at it. And we certainly anticipate that over not just this year, but over the coming years as we get deeper into policy work and review and go back to what vision and values have said as well, that we will be refining and addressing and thinking about how we can better improve upon what we're putting in our policy documents and how that can have an impact or be more impactful going forward. So again, just a couple of things that I want to talk about on this report before we really get into it. And I really want to be clear about why we've done this reporting. First, it furthers our accountability in the region and to the region. And while we've been reporting in our various standing committees on the status of the projects that you can find in this report, there was no one centralized place or location for the public or even us as council members or council staff to be able to look back to see if what we were doing was what we said we were going to do and to see whether that was even having an impact. Further, we heard from members of the community and some of even our advisory committee members and some of you as well about whether such a report even existed. And we said, that's a great idea. We should probably do that. And again, I really want to stress the scope of this report is not to discount that volume of work that the council has done since the adoption of Thrive. In more detail, this report does not include those commitments identified under the other 4 outcomes in Thrive. That's another project that can be underway, and certainly there's a lot of intersection amongst the commitments in the other outcomes as well related to the commitments under equity. This does not document internal efforts. It doesn't include any work that's currently underway or is planned to be done this year or is not yet complete. It does not talk about any work that we might have upcoming, like some of the projects that you've funded with your discretionary funds in the budget this year. That is not a part of this report, but certainly does play a meaningful role in furthering and advancing equity in the region. And then just one other note before I really jump in. I apologize for all of the prelude, but it's really important. When Thrive was developed, the council had recently completed the Choice, Place, and Opportunity report in our efforts to advance place-based equity. That was a really important effort across the region. But as part of that effort, the council identified areas of concentrated poverty, or ACPs, which many of you are familiar with, as a geography in which to focus our efforts and pay special attention to. You might recall, though, over the last couple of years, our staff has come to you, Kristen Rabaturis and Matt Schroeder, to talk more about how we might change our efforts based on what we've been hearing from community about a deficit-based approach to regional planning and investment efforts. The project was called Rethinking Areas of Concentrated Poverty, and that resulted in us discontinuing the use of ACPs as in other poverty metrics, particularly race-based ones, and to provide a more holistic data resource in our equity considerations for place-based advocacy for decision-making. You can find that information on our website as well. You may recall pre-COVID, a very engaging conversation that Matt and Kristen had with you all, and work that they had been doing internally as well with our staff to share different ways of including consideration that are beyond the scope of just the limited ACP. And just reminding you all as well that most people of color don't live in areas of concentrated poverty, but still are feeling the impacts of racism within the system. And most people who are poor don't live in areas of concentrated poverty either. So it really was a limited way to address the broad scope of experiences that people have across the region and across a wide variety of geographies in our region. But for the purposes of today's report, we did use ACPs and ACP 50s, which are racially concentrated areas of poverty, to analyze the commitments because of the context in which they were developed. The commitments specifically referenced those ACPs. So you will see that in this report, and that's more of a reflection of how it was developed than where we are today. So jumping in. There are 4 strategies, and this first one of using our influence and investments to build a more equitable region is really one of the key elements that the council has really focused on. And just some highlights, probably because it's close to home for me, is the work that we've done in the Livable Communities Act program together, where the council has invested nearly $60 million in the region's high poverty neighborhoods between 2014 and 2021. These are all of our grant programs. In the Livable Communities program, and that supported a significant number of new housing units within those areas, in addition to a lot of preservation and rehabilitation of housing units, nearly 1,000 more, or more than 1,000 additional ones. within that group of housing units, those 7,900 housing units, that at least nearly 50% of those were designated as affordable at 60% area median income or less. A lot of effort was also done. Another highlight in this area is this deep engagement within our organization, with local governments, and with community organizations on equity metrics. We learned so much that our teams have applied to our work since then, and that does not mean we've checked this one off our list, but rather demonstrates the importance of a continued engagement with communities even after a project is considered done, which it never really is when you're in the scope of long-range planning like I am. In creating real choices on where we live, how we travel, and where we recreate, this is really to the core function of what the council does in its regional planning documents, right? How we plan for our transportation systems, how we plan for the park system, how we plan for our wastewater systems, and then related to that, where people actually live and work, is really at the core function of what the council does. Sorry, I turn my page. Under this strategy and on the next, we have so many highlights here, and in the report even more, simply because this really is at the heart of what the council does, and really thinking about how this work, and as we've reported, has really meaningfully shifted our expectations and work around community engagement as it relates to our planning work, as it relates to our on-the-ground project development, like you just heard with the BRT work. That community engagement really informs what we are doing. You are all familiar with, and I can't thank you enough for the historic investment in the LCA's local housing incentives account that are above the statutory minimums. Statutory requirements put us at $1.5 million per year, which you can't build a lot of houses with that amount of money. But over the last couple of years, we've had $5 and $8 million each year, which are what we've never seen before in that program. And that's really helped us to support a broader range of housing choice and more of housing choice across more communities in the region. And speaking of housing choice, it's a core tenet of our Metro HRA's work, with some of our larger projects and programs, including our mobility counseling program, shifting to the use of small area fair market rents, and our homeless action team partnership with Metro Transit. In our update to our regional parks policy plan, we built the equity analysis requirement for our regional parks master plans that parks implementing agencies are responsible for developing as one of the ways that we can plan for and create welcoming and inclusive park spaces in our region. Continue on this strategy, we have some additional transit-related highlights during COVID, and you've heard this before, so I know I'm not doing it justice, but our Metro Mobility service really pivoted to temporarily serve other emerging needs of our customers, such as through the grocery and goods delivery program to serve MetMo customers, and a temporary food shelf distribution program to improve access to food. Our Metro Transit team has been implementing new models of community partnership, as demonstrated through the Better Bus Stops program and through current work on the Blue Line Extension Anti-Displacement Work Group. Another example of creating choice in how we travel is Transit's annual service equity evaluation, which considers key metrics relevant to transit service and its impacts on communities of color and low-income communities. This evaluation goes beyond what is required in federal compliance and is designed to explore the equity of service, distribution, access, and quality throughout the service area. Our third equity strategy is investing in a mix of affordability along the region's transit corridors. I've talked a lot about housing already, but these highlights are specific to transit station areas in particular, especially because as Thrive was being developed, this was a new policy area for our regional planning documents. Blue Line had only been open, the original Blue Line had only been open for a few years, what we refer to as the Hiawatha, the old times. And the Green Line was under development and slated for opening, and that happened shortly after adoption of Thrive. And we didn't have policy around that. So there was a real focus on this in particular, and a lot of caution that we heard from our constituents in the region about anxiety around how transit station area investments might influence their community and their neighborhoods in particular, and potentially make it difficult for them to continue living in those areas. Some of our highlights include our Livable Communities grant programs, particularly those centered around transit-oriented development. And since the adoption of Thrive, the council has awarded nearly $35 million to projects in station areas along transit ways in the region. This isn't limited to just the LRT lines, but includes our bus rapid transit and high-frequency bus corridors, as well as a number of other similar high-frequency routes in suburban areas. This resulted in about half of the 5,300 new housing units funded being affordable at 60% AMI. The council also created a pre-development program to help set the stage for projects in station areas as well. This would support things like ordinance development and station area planning to help local governments be ready for new development opportunities as the stations were being opened and transit service being made available. The council also partnered with local governments to secure Federal Transit Administration grants to support intensive station area planning in particular along some of our suburban routes like the Gold Line corridor. In both this case and another case, this advanced planning included the development of housing strategies for the corridor as well as corridor-specific engagement to support these planning efforts. And then our final strategy of engaging a full cross-section of the community in decision-making. This is a core component of all of the work that I mentioned prior and all of the things that are in our report and well beyond that as well. And this establishes the long-term process for continuing to address the commitments under this strategy. The council developed and is implementing its public engagement plan and continues to do that. That public engagement plan is structured around principles and strategies that were co-created with community members and are detailed in that report online. Our report also provides a few examples of how this process has worked in practice, particularly related to regional planning and partnerships. As noted on this slide, examples of organizational partnerships helps us to engage critical audiences and to promote inclusion in the process and in the outcomes in the region. The Rethinking I-94 project and the Regional Economic Framework are just two examples of those organizational partnerships that help further our work and build trust with community in the region. The council has expanded the role of community and diverse voices in its advisory committee selection and in planning studies and supporting engagements for these projects. It doesn't mean we're done there and that we rest on our laurels, but it certainly is an improvement on where we have been, and we can continue to go further in those selections as well. Another example from transit that I know you're all familiar with is its intentional engagement process related to transit safety, where the council partnered with the Citizens League to first engage community, followed by a council work group and a work plan to carry out those efforts. Again, I know there's a lot of work that has gone into that I've summarized into one sentence, so I don't want to cause any short shrift on that, but there's just so much to report on, and I know we have a lot to discuss. So as we get to the 2050 development guide, there are some takeaways that we're applying. We continue to learn from implementing these strategies since the adoption of Thrive, as I described in our place-based equity work, and continue to evolve our work and thinking around that based on what we're hearing from our partners and what we're hearing from residents in the community as well. But also, as we turn to our 2050 planning process, there are some lessons that we'll be applying to our work. If you were able to dig in and read the equity outcome in Thrive, you will find that the council commitments range from broad goal-like statements to more detailed technical actions. Even just the 4 strategies I shared with you today were very broad, choice across all of our things, to very specific housing choice within transit station areas, right? They have such a broad range to them, and whether that was intentional or not, it can sometimes lead to confusion about what belongs where and who's responsible for what when things are living in our higher level document, and also how do we report on something that covers such a broad range of the work that we do at the council. It can be confusing for our members and for readers as well about the relative importance of each of the commitments under those strategies as well, and its potential to make a difference, or even how we would measure how much of a difference that commitment can make in furthering the strategy or the overall outcome that's stated in our document. So one of our biggest takeaways is to improve that clarity and that transparency. As part of the planning process and as a component of the 2050 development guide, including evaluation and metrics that are developed with direct consultation with impacted communities is incredibly important. In the development of Thrive, we didn't have those metrics or consultations. We didn't come up with 5 indicators till nearly 3 years later, and we were already doing work implementing the guide. So there's a lot of value in doing those things together, not just in being able to be transparent and accountable to our actions, but also for us to be able to say and measure in the process and discuss with you as policymakers, will this action have an impact? How would we measure an impact, and under what circumstances might we change course or make a different change? Some other change or takeaways that I know Mike Larson shared with you earlier as well when he spoke to you about vision and values, is that we do find that our documents are sometimes overly complex, hard to read, a lot of context and a lot of explanation and reflection. It makes it hard to find, well, what are we committing to? It's almost obscure or obfuscated, which is not the intent. So there are a lot of opportunities for us to make improvement just in our overall writing, but opportunities for us to be clearer about what our goals are, what our intent is, and how we would measure our success. So after all of my talking very quickly, and I apologize for how quickly I've talked, I'd love to hear your thoughts on how we could do this work in the 2050 regional planning process. If there are things that you've found about the Thrive document itself as it relates to the equity outcome that you found that were really great, that worked well, or things that we can improve upon, really the floor is yours, and I'm happy to hear from you. I would be remiss, I do want to just thank Kristen Ribaturas one more time. Her efforts to really pull together this report are remarkable. I'm not sure how she finds the time, but really appreciate all of the staff across the council who contributed to creating this report as well, not just in creating the report, but in all the work that staff and U.S. policymakers have supported over the years in implementing this document. Thank you.
Thanks, Lisa. We won't go through every part of the report, but this presentation, I think, gives us that overview. So we'll open it up. Any comments, thoughts, questions? Councilmember Barber.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just as my thoughts, we had the great presentation at Committee of the Whole last week where you're hearing from different communities. So, and what equity and what some of these ideas mean to these different communities. I mean, I think it was very profound when we heard from Belle Plaine that not having a car in Belle Plaine means you're stuck. You can't go anywhere. There are no options and things like that. And so I think it's really important as we're doing some of this work that we continue to reach out to a broad base of communities, because whatever policies and things we put into place have to work both in a Bloomington and a Belle Plaine. And I know you've heard me say this many times, so she's smiling because she has heard me say this many times. But it's really, I think it's really critical to make it make sense and be useful for communities. When we look over the last comprehensive plan cycle, I think the plans were so good because the cities were allowed to do the work to get us the information we needed in the adjacent communities, but they were really allowed the opportunity to dig in and figure out what was important to them. And a lot of those cities use that as a good opportunity to build something as a guide for their own future. And I think we have more and more lessons that we can learn, that we can apply, so that whatever version of Thrive for 2050 comes into play is really reflective of all of that work that they did too. So I think that's really kind of critical. So I really, number one, compliment your group for bringing communities back to that Committee of the Whole. I thought was just amazing for that reason, and I really hope we can keep doing that throughout this process. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Riva, Councilmember Chandler.
Okay, thank you. You know, the opportunity to participate in the 2050 regional guide when, you know, it's 2022, this is huge for us to be starting this. We probably won't be here when that finishes or when it gets implemented, but it's huge. The takeaways that we're applying is also very important in terms of the evaluation and metrics. I'm happy to see that we've included systems for making tracking easier. Also, that requires some forethought. What should we be tracking? That's really important. And making, I guess I would add that maybe standardizing the tracking could also be helpful, and also be a way to make the tracking easier.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
Good comments, right? And by tracking, when you think about indicators, those are the areas we really need to focus on. Is there progress? And what's interesting about last week was what you just described, Councilmember Barber, on on what applies to one city or town can be true for others, but maybe not. I mean, there's so many different stories there that, in a way, we look at indicators, but there's not a cookie cutter. I like the idea of a framework allows the flexibility and engagement. The other thing is the engagement itself is part of the process, you know, building the awareness. Other thoughts, questions? Councilmember, I'm sorry, Councilmember Gonzalez.
Thank you, Chair. I was thinking on the downstream impact of what we do here at the council, and one of the examples that came to my mind is in affordable housing, and I'm just going to set it out. My scenario, hopefully you will get what I mean, is that if we improve a park, and that as a result of that, the prices, the home prices increase in a neighborhood, and that drives out affordable housing. I mean, that's not something that the council is doing directly, and of course we want to improve the park. But if there's a way to track 5 steps down the road the effect of what we do, and the same with our transit lines. In addition to the transit-oriented development grants and things like that, are there other things that if we establish a bus or rapid or rail line 5 steps down the road, it's going to have X impact, positive or negative, on affordable housing? Is there a way to track that in the first place? And if it is, are we doing it?
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Gonzalez, you're speaking my language. It certainly is something that, especially in the realm of gentrification and displacement, is something that we're looking at more broadly, not just in a housing context. I think the work started with the Blue Line Extension Anti-Displacement Work Group is something that we are internally integrated on very closely, because we also want to take our learnings from there and apply them to items that we've heard more about, like green gentrification. What does it mean to even invest in, highways in certain areas? What impact does it have on housing in the nearby areas? Part of that is kind of the economics of place and amenity, right? If you have limited amenities, then things like parks become valuable and they drive up the value of housing around them. So the better question, one of the questions that we ask then is, how do we provide amenities to everybody so that doesn't become an economic driver that changes housing? Of course, we have limited investment dollars to work with. So those are trade-offs that certainly we are exploring. It's actually a project we have on our list to do this year and get started, is gentrification and all of the things that are related to council investment, for sure. We will be reporting on you more on that as we dig in more and learn more about what we're finding and what we've seen across other regions in the nation that are also looking at this, and even specialized organizations like Trust for Public Land, who do review of what does parks investments do to surrounding neighborhoods. There are a lot of folks who dig into this that we hope to tap into.
Thank you.
Councilmember Vento.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Director Barajas, I'm curious as to, and perhaps Councilmember Wolf or Councilmember Barber could answer this question, but in the development of the process and going through the 2040 plan, I'm wondering if individual members of the council had a role in having conversations similar to this with the cities and townships and counties that we represent, and if that would be a part of the 2050 regional planning process. I'm sure that the staff, depending on the sectors they represent, have those kinds of conversations, but I'm curious as to our role. And you're right, Councilmember Chambliss, we may not be here for this, but I'm just curious what future council members will have for a role and what we can do between now and December to help advance this conversation.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Councilmember Vento, that's an excellent question, and I'll speak more about what you can do. And it's really, we would love your engagement as policymakers with your peers around the region. The policymaker discussion is so important. That's work that we are doing with Sam O'Connell right now, our Director of Community Relations, to help build those connections and kind of put together a slate of what are the things that we can be doing today as we're developing and building the regional vision and our, what we will call our working vision and values that give us, well, they won't become the regional vision until they're adopted, but they give us the direction for doing our additional policy work. That engagement will be really important. Certainly would love all of your partnership in that as well, but we'll be sharing more about what those opportunities might look like, and if you have thoughts, absolutely, we'll take those.
Councilmember Wolf.
I've been here for a long time and been through a lot of these, and one thing that I keep being reminded of is how much turnover there is, both in city staffs and in elected officials, that the training is never done. Because it's not very often that you have the same people 10 years later when they're doing another round of the plan. And so it's very important each time to keep going back and having those conversations with the local governments and letting people know they do have local discretion on how they do things. It's not just the Met Council told us you had to do this. They do have local control, and that local control is important. And that we won't judge them on what, as long as you bring a plan in that meets all of the requirements, we have to say yes. We're not judging you on, we're not going to give you any money if you don't put this in your plan, kind of a thing. But that fear is out there, and it's very prevalent amongst cities. And I also want to follow up on what Councilmember Barber was talking about on the difference between Belle Plaine and Bloomington, kind of a deal. We have cities that have 125 people, and they have no full-time staff. One of my cities that's bigger than that, one of the city council members runs their wastewater treatment plant, which is really just a couple of ponds, And so we've talked over and over and over again each time we have another round about how we need to have kind of a scalability of comp plan updates, have a light version for places where it's still going to be 125 people 10 years from now, 20 years from now. They don't need all of the elements that a Lakeville does that's growing rapidly, or Minneapolis where things are really complex. If you're a teeny tiny town with no full-time staff, we can't expect the same sort of planning going on when nothing's changing. Their biggest dilemma is, can we afford to repave one of our streets, kind of a deal. And we keep talking about having a light version, but we have never actually gotten there. We've given grants for consultants to come in and do the work, but when you're a really small town, some of that work maybe isn't necessary, and we don't need to make jobs for consultants, but just recognize that some places are more stable than others and don't have a lot of planning things that they need to do.
Thank you, Councilmember, and you have been here and seen several cycles, and I will affirm we're still talking about it. So I don't know if Director Borjas, do you want to bring us up to date? Because we are looking at some both streamlining and resources to help smaller
Mr. Chair, definitely agree with Councilmember Wolf. There's the things that we would prefer to make easier, and the application of what the state law says is required, right? And oftentimes, even with the funds in their hands, local government staff, the small ones that only are half-time, one person, right, don't even have the time to find a consultant to do the work. So one of the things we are exploring that state law does allow the council to do is to just actually enter into a contractual agreement with those local governments and do the plan work that needs to get done, update that plan, and provide it to them. Here, we updated it. You don't have to do anything. It would probably be faster and cost us less money, but also take a lot of that burden off of local government staff. There's obviously work that needs to go into that, and who would be eligible, and consulting that we need to do, not officially as consultants, but engagement we need to do with those smaller local governments. Some of them are our grantees right now who are still struggling to finish up their local plans, and this is part of that follow-up for us with them is what if, would this be something that you would be interested in? If it's not something you're interested in, then we'll find a different path, right? But we find that especially some of the requirements can be hard to understand if you're not an engineer, if you're not someone who already does this every day, kind of thing. And most of our local staff don't do this every day. So if there's a way that we can make that easier, we will find that way and get it done. In my experience, when I was working with local governments as a sector rep in our local planning assistance group, that there certainly were some plans where I did spend a lot more time, almost as a consultant in some ways, saying, yep, here's the table you're going to want to use. I made this map for you. I think this meets your needs. Let me know if you need any changes. But if we do that in a more formal and take some of that burden off and that anxiety off up front, that can really help, we hope, facilitate that plan. But that's something we'll be engaging with those, especially smaller local governments, on if that's something that would be amenable, if there are kind of pitfalls or things we should be aware of as we move through that. But certainly something that we are enabled to do under our current state law. I don't know that the council's ever done it, though. I just kind of tripped over it when I was reading about something else in our chapter 473.
It's a really interesting idea, and I've been very supportive. I think that it's a balancing act because, as you maybe are inferring, we can actually save staff time by actually bringing it in-house. And what a benefit if we go and meet the township or the city where they are and be helpful. But if it's viewed as, well, here comes the Met Council imposing its plan upon them, that's not what we want to do. So I think there's a delicate balance there. Councilmember Vento.
Totally, Mr. Chair, totally agree with what you just said, and I would suggest that early on, a handful of the smaller cities and township, board chairs, mayors, administrators be a part of the conversation in terms of setting it up so we avoid that.
Yeah. Other thoughts? Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple of things, and I know we've talked about this, but what is the timeline? We're at the beginning of the process. I haven't gone through I've been on the receiving end of it as a city official. So thank you, Councilmember Wolf, for your comments, because that was exactly what I was thinking too. And I really appreciate the direction we're going. And then in addition to kind of timeline and adoption and all of that, once we get through this process, will it how do I say this? We've gone from a blueprint back in the day of Peter Bell to Thrive 2040. So will this look and feel different? I've heard maybe you mentioned a little bit tonight, or we've mentioned too, like it's very text heavy and it's very, it's a lot to absorb and get through. So if there's a way, I don't know, I don't want to do a wholesale right maybe, but what does this in your mind look like as we try to, because this was even written so long ago, right? By the time you write it, it's out of date in a lot of ways, but it's about process, so I don't know.
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Johnson, your first question around timeline, we are generally scheduled for adoption end of 2024, early 2025, with issuance of system statements to local governments by September of 2025, which initiates their local comprehensive planning process, which is due to us by the end of 2028. So that means we have got a couple of years here, but it's a short time period for a lot of work. So vision and values is our focus this year, but we also are doing a lot of technical engagement across the division's work here, not just in community development, but I know our water resources group, for example, has a planning advisory group. We recently started up our regional planning advisory group of local staff to be technical advice along the way, a long range or a wide range of folks participating in that. Next year will be deeper policy discussion work within your committees, within our advisory committees, our communities like TAC Planning and MOSAC and cross-committee work as well, where I know we've had, for example, a lot of MOSAC and LUAC collaboration on that land use and water connection. And then into that refinements, I'm giving you very big buckets for a whole lot of work that staff will be engaging with you all on and with the region on in the coming years. To what it will look like. I can't say what it will look like for sure, but certainly what we have been talking about and then we've shared with you as policymakers and what we've talked about with staff is recognizing that while we are developing and have areas of responsibility to certain constituent groups, right? We have certain partners. Our transportation folks, for example, work with certain, like the counties in certain work, but some of those counties are also implementing agencies for parks. And some of them also are responsible for long-range plans for land use as well. And recognizing that our documents need to read clearly and consistently across all of our work, because while we think that we have maybe, these different partners, implementing partners in the work, many of those partners are the same people. And maybe, well, I should say the same organizations, maybe not the same people within those organizations, but certainly the same boards. And it's really important that what we're sharing is, and our approaches to that work are both integrated across our work, to the point that Councilmember Gonzalez made. An investment that we make in one area certainly can have an impact on the work of, in another area that we're also responsible for. And we don't want to be at cross purposes, but want to be advancing that work together. What it will be called is a policymaker discussion. It's up to you. It usually, in past years, I think the chair and others, I haven't been privy to those conversations, name the document sometime during the process before it comes through for adoption. We generally, you will hear us call it the 2050 regional plan, because that's what statute generically calls it. How you brand it will be up to you. But what we are looking at is how we make this document easier to find and navigate online, not just in a PDF form, but in a way that shows that there are a lot of connections. What we say about our responsibilities, I will just take a cross-cutting issue like climate change. That's not something that one action alone is going to solve, but are a variety of different things that our different divisions are responsible for. And one action in one area can actually have benefits for other things that we're, and other goals that we might have as well. So we want to be able to show that and integrate that across our work in a way that's really easy to navigate on a web platform. It doesn't necessarily lend itself to being in a document, but our documents can be easier, more readily connected, easier to read, and easier to navigate too. I'm not an expert in format, but I know what doesn't work.
Thank you.
Councilmember Sterner.
Thank you, Chair. I just have a couple questions. So the first one has to do with just, do the counties help the small cities and the townships and plannings either in the past or plan to in the future?
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, Councilmember Sterner, did the counties, I didn't catch that.
Yeah, with the planning, like we're talking about, maybe we would help them with planning, but I was wondering if the counties themselves actually will help their small cities and the townships with their planning issues.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, Councilmember Sterner, there are a couple of counties that actually have planning authority for the townships within their jurisdiction. So Scott County and Carver County both do the long-range planning, the land use planning for those townships, and are responsible for adopting that. They engage with the townships and the town boards in that process, but they actually hold that planning authority. In Ramsey County, Wiper Township is the only township, and they do their own plan. In Dakota County, the townships are responsible for their own planning, but they do the work collaboratively together, and we've funded that collaborative effort as a streamlined way of doing their plans. In Anoka County, the one township does their own plan. All of the other cities all of the other former townships have since incorporated since I've been at the council. And in Hennepin County, there are no townships any longer now that Rogers and Hessen Township merged. And in Washington County formally turned over planning responsibilities to the townships probably about 6 years ago, which needed to be done by shared resolution of the townships and the county. They were kind of jointly doing the work previously over the last several decades, but more recently they decided together that they would formally pass that responsibility onto the townships.
Thank you.
That was a test of my knowledge. Thank you.
Oh, really good.
That was impressive.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So one more, this was more big, and you started alluding to it, but I'm wondering when you're incorporating like environmental planning, environmental justice, is it like more intentional, or is it more just like we check the boxes, or it just comes in like everything from multimodal trails to housing being, with certified to, climate change type things and, where we put power plants and things like that.
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Sterner, certainly environmental justice is an important part of our work. There are some federal requirements, especially in our transportation planning, like Title VI, that we have to do. Some of the work that we are doing right now as staff is, and we've talked about this around our climate action planning, is really centering environmental justice impacts of our work, or more importantly, benefits of who's benefiting from the work that we're doing, and ensuring that communities who have historically been the recipients of the negative impacts actually see some of that, see some of the benefits of our work going forward. Now, of course, the devil is in the details and how you would carry that out, and will look a little bit different for project-specific work. We're building this line here versus policy work, which can be a little bit more ambiguous about our expectations or where this might work. So we have to, we're in the early stages of figuring out how we provide good, informative policy analysis for your discussion and ensure that we're really addressing or understanding what the trade-offs of different policy approaches across our planning work. I know it's not like an easy answer, but we're in the beginning of doing that, and you will certainly be hearing more about that in the coming years.
Thank you.
Any other thoughts, questions? Councilmember Gonzalez.
Just going back to the issue of the smaller towns and townships, do we have a list or at least a criteria of what we, who would we consider cities or townships that need assistance? I mean, is every single entity that is called a township? Is it every town? Is it depending on the population level? And, Washington County, like you just mentioned, they have to do their own plans, and that's certainly an issue that I heard from different constituencies. So how big is the work, I guess, that's what I'm saying.
Mr. Chair, council members, as we were developing our planning assistance grant program for this cycle, what the statute actually directs us to consider who's most in need, both financially and for planning purposes as well. So through a lot of discussion with the Land Use Advisory Committee in the last cycle, the committee landed on the level of change that a community might be facing, how much growth, if it was above median, the regional median amount of growth, percent growth for each community, as well as their financial capacity per capita to support that need. So that resulted in not just small towns, but a variety of larger communities as well on the financial capacity per capita need. And then further, the council also determined that communities that were smaller than 5,000 population is kind of a standard for transportation funding and other types of funding in the state, that once you hit 5,000, you start to become eligible for a lot of other funding programs that we use that same standard for just supporting small towns in their work as well, regardless of the other two, financial capacity or amount of growth that they were expecting to occur. When we were talking about specifically meeting the needs of communities who struggle with getting their plan done because they have a limited amount of staff, I think what we will be bringing to you as we discuss how that might work is not just what I had mentioned prior, amount of growth or tax capacity, because as Councilmember Wolf said, it doesn't even matter if they're growing or not, right? They still have a responsibility, and that can't be the limiting factor in that, or deciding factor. So we'll also be sharing with you what our experience has been for our grantees that are those smaller communities that even with funds, who that's impacting, because that certainly should be part of the equation. And no, not just even in our grantees, but being able to look back, because we do track when we receive plans from every single community. We have it for the last 40 years, how long it takes them to get from start to finish once we receive it. And we can do an analysis on which types of communities are having the hardest time with that, or how long, or if they're just late in getting it to us. All of those types of things we are able to pull out and analyze. So certainly information that as council members, you all would be deciding who we should be providing those services to. So if you have other thoughts on that too, and we're not quite there because we're not quite at the planning part of that, but we will be having that discussion as we get nearer to the nearer to adoption and implementation of the 2050 plan, but certainly there are things that we can start to pull and start to be gathering in spots and being ready for that as we think about how we get to implementation.
Thank you.
Questions, thoughts? Well, thank you so much for the presentation and everyone for the conversation. We learn every meeting, but also important to note that this is the beginning, not the end. We're going to continue to talk about the process and how it improves and the work ahead to develop that 2050 plan.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, council members.
Well, that brings us to the end of our formal agenda. We have an opportunity for any other reports that any council member wish to share. And, oh, I should look up what I asked. Councilmember Fenton.
Thank you, Chair. I would just note that tomorrow is Workers' Memorial Day, and it's Workers' Memorial Week, and I think fitting that we're back here in person after 2 years, and for the last 2 years, you've had a lot of frontline workers, Metropolitan Council employees, putting their health and safety on the line, and just want to give thanks, and it's good to be back.
Thank you. Thanks for that comment. You know a lot about safety in work zones, and work zones aren't only highways. They're throughout a lot of our work, so thank you for bringing that up. Anyone else? Thoughts? Regional Administrator Bogey is out of town, but still connected, and she'll be back shortly. So, I don't know if Deputy Regional Administrator Gonzalez, do you have anything to share?
Yes.
You do?
Chair. Yes, I do.
Please.
You want me to?
No, I do.
No, Chair, council members, very nice to meet you finally in person. I've met some of you and most of you online, and for those of you that have not had an opportunity to meet, I hope that we can spend some time so I can hear your thoughts. I know it's like long overdue. I've been here 5 months now, so I'm a pro, I suppose. But I did wanted to give you a quick update on what's going on. So our staff is back in the office, as we are. We're working a hybrid model, and it's going as expected. To be quite frank, there are some concerns because of the virus and the variant that's going on now. But we are following the lead of the governor and the Department of Health. Also, as a reminder, we are providing the U of M our wastewater information, which is really a lead indicator. And they've done a really good job presenting our findings on what we do here in the council throughout the country. In fact, I get messages from my old